I built an AI agent to run paid ads, gave it instructions, connected the accounts, briefed it like the most advanced media buyer I could hire, and then I spent months going in circles. Not because it was bad at the job, but because every 6 weeks I'd start a new chat and it would forget everything. I want to tell you about the day that Claude told me I was wrong, explained why, and then admitted it had been wrong first. And what that taught me about the job nobody warns you you're signing up for. Here's what nobody tells you when they're selling you on AI. Chats end. They run out of room. You can't keep one going forever, so you don't. So you start a new one. You've seen it happen, right? Where like you're working on a chat and it tells you like, hey, we can no longer continue in this, start a new chat because we ran out of memory or space or whatever it might be. You have to start a new campaign, new chat. For me, that's a monthly thing that I do for some of my clients, and sometimes every 6 weeks. And a new chat, even though you might start it in the same project folder, there's still a little bit of amnesia going on there, right? Because it doesn't have the full context. Even if you ask it, please go read the previous chat thoroughly again. So there I was, running the same agent inside the same project folder. And every single cycle, it would walk through the same reasoning to arrive at the same conclusions. Sometimes I correct it, and I still do that sometimes, based on something that like I watched happen, say like 2 campaigns ago. And then the next time I'd like correct it again, the same correction. I kept noticing a pattern that I couldn't quite grab. Something was wrong and I couldn't really name it. And the reason I couldn't name it is because the pattern lived across chats and nothing was holding it. Well, nothing except me. That's the part that I want you to sit with, and that's the part that I want you to remember the most about this episode. I wasn't undisciplined. I wasn't using the wrong tool. The architecture of it was doing exactly what it does. I was the memory, right? I was the one that was remembering it. Like, yeah, but last time we ran that same exact process, this is what came up with. Why can't you remember that? And I get frustrated sometimes. So it's like, why do I have to remind you about this stuff again? And we did this the last time. Like, why couldn't you remember? Same thing, like every cycle, carrying knowledge across a boundary in my head or like badly. I would always wonder like why the thing wasn't getting any smarter. Like I thought that was the whole point of AI, right? You know, there's reasons for that, and it does in a sense get a little bit smarter every time, mostly because the programmers of the thing end up learning and then fixing the thing, right? But you shouldn't have to wait till the next update to get the type of results that you want. And at this point, you're seeing in the news that people are giving up on AI. Like it's getting too expensive. It's getting, humans can do the job better. Like there's still like probably half and half of that, right? Like you're still hearing plenty of like, hey, so-and-so company is like laying off 10,000 employees because they're replacing it with the AI, or you assume at least that they're doing that. But then you're also hearing quite a bit they're saying like, hey, they're rehiring people, some other company is, because it's costing a lot of tokens, right? A lot of money. But what I find is that most people who quietly gave up on AI hit exactly this and drew a different conclusion. They decided the tool didn't work. It worked fine, it just couldn't remember, and nobody told them that was their job. Then they waste more tokens because they had to reprompt the thing and lose themselves in all that. And and then you have to ask the company for like, can you buy more tokens for me? Because like, and then it ends up being like, why did we fire all those people that were doing this job for the same price or right around the same amount? So that's part of like what I have been trying to avoid myself, not from like a firing and hiring stuff, because I'm not at that point, but from the sense of like I'm wasting time of like doing all that. So what I did is that I built it a memory. It's 3 layers and they do different work. And that's what I'm here to talk about. So the chat. This is where the work happens. And if you've gotten the latest update, you notice on Claude, for example, you've noticed that they are going away from like chat being one thing and co-work being another thing. Like now you're going to be able to like do the co-work chat stuff across different computers. Because that was an issue, right? It was like sometimes I would have a co-work situation going on my laptop, but at the moment I'm letting it do its thing, but I'm working on my phone or I'm working on my desktop and I can't pull the co-work thing. I used to not be able to, so they're fixing that, and which makes a little bit more sense. But the chat itself, that's where the work happens, right? And that's where it dies. And don't forget that, because it's not a flaw, it's a container, and it has a certain size. Everything you want to survive has to leave before the chat does. So remember that. Everything that you want to survive has to leave before the chat does. So that was the first layer. The second layer is the project instructions. This is how it behaves, the persona, the standing rules, the guardrails, the things it should never do again. This survives the chat, or it should, right? I've actually seen, co-working with people, they have a project folder, and then there's the memory in the project folder, which the AI does on its own at that point, which is very useful. But the project folder instructions, sometimes people forget even that part, right? And that's very important, because it technically should be checking the project folder instructions every single time before it answers whatever you're trying to get it to help you do. And so first layer again is the chat, second layer is the project folder instructions, and the third layer is the history. So for me, that's like a doc or a sheet, like an Excel sheet or a Google sheet that I keep in Google Drive. You can keep it in your local computer. Personally, I've been using Google Drive just because I'm using multiple computers, and it's easier that way. You can download the Google Drive app, so that way Claude or whomever can read it as a local file, but it's really connected to the internet. But it won't let you save that whole memory / like main working file with your like Google Drive connector, and it's going to look for a local folder in your computer. And so by downloading the Google Drive app, if you haven't done that, you should, because then it helps you access Google Drive online kind of situation. And I know that you're like, well, but that's not secure. You know what? What the hell is secure in these days anyways, right? So I have all sorts of like, inside of Google Drive, I have all sorts of like extra passwords and whatnot, so that in case whatever happens, then they have to go through that extra layer. But for me, for the work that I do, for the work that the agency does, that I don't worry about that. So that's my 2 cents on that. But so again, the first layer was the chat, second layer project instructions, and now the history, right? And so every campaign, what we ran, what we spent, what we expected, what actually happened, and what it changed our minds about gets written into that Drive doc / Google sheet every single time that we work on a certain project for that same company using those same project folder instructions. So that third layer is newer for us, and it's changed everything. The process time dropped to a fraction of what it was. I stopped circling around. The agent basically stopped re-deriving everything from zero, right? It started arriving at the conversation already knowing what we've learned, and got better on its own. So it's like a closed loop, or it is a closed loop, right? Because it's like it's looking at the project folder instructions on how to behave. And one of the things that the project folder instructions instructs the AI to behave as is to like, hey, before you do anything else, go into the history folder and see everything that we've learned that's going to be useful for this new campaign, right? And like do all that first before you do. And certainly, I guess you could put that into the project folder instructions, but I feel like having a third layer, it's a little bit easier, because I don't have to update the instructions every single time. I do it often, and you should see my last newsletter episode on that like, hey, anytime you work and you surface something new, you should update your project folder instructions. But say you don't, uncover something new or see something that you should update in your project folder instructions, then don't, right? And then just keep the memory stuff of like what you have learned together, like in this case Facebook ads for one company, keep that in the history folder, so that way it's acting the same way. One of the ways that it's acting is that it's checking the folder for like all the like best practices and what we have learned, and let's not make the same mistakes, and then it gives you a response and helps you out. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a rule on how to do that. It's just more of a ritual. At the end of every cycle, I ask the agent to go read its own history, and I make it draft the update. Here's what should change in your instructions. Here's what you should go in the doc, and then I make it do the thing that actually matters. It has to tell me, and this is important, I ask it to make it do the thing that actually matters, which is to tell me how these changes that it's suggesting to me for the future, to tell me how it's going to help next time we run a campaign. And if it can't explain the mechanism by which a lesson changes future behavior, then it isn't a lesson, it's just a note. And that single requirement does more work than any rule that I could write. So then I finalize it, I update it manually, and almost nothing gets deleted. I would say 90 to 95% of what's there already in the history, it stays. The memory accretes, right? That's why it compounds instead of like drifting away. And sure, that probably means that, 10 campaigns from now, it's taking a little bit longer to like reply, and that's totally okay, because what I want is results, right? What I want is 10x return on ad spend. I want 20x return on ad spend. And I can surmise and give opinions on like, here's what works and what works. And I have plenty of friends that I talk to about like, you should try this, and this has been working for our agency, and watch YouTube videos. And you know what? I've spent the time to do those things, and sometimes they work great, sometimes they don't. But whenever you take that memory and the agent, Claude or Chat is looking into that history of what has worked and what hasn't worked and what changes, because like I update, think about this, like I change, like we set up a campaign, usually about 10 to 14 days later, we check in, like, how are the results going? At that point, it's like, oh, well, this is how they're going. If your goal was 5x on ROAS, right now we're at 1.5. And the reason is, and it'll give you a reason, so we should probably try to update the landing page, or like, what do we change the copy, right? And then and that's a whole nother chapter or episode on like how many different variations of different ads you should have, but that, and like how much you should spend here and should spend there. But either way, like that, again, that's a different episode for that. But within that context, it'll do it within 14 days. And then at the end of the month, we do a review, right? And then it's almost like, well, what did we learn this time around compared to like the 5 other campaigns, 10 other campaigns that we've done already before with this same company, with this similar ad spend, with, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll learn from that. And it does. And what we keep seeing is that within each company, like that ROS keeps going up, right? It keeps getting higher and higher percentage-wise every month, because it's taking lessons and then reapplying itself in the best way that it can. So notice that the job mostly now for me is in that loop. I don't write the memory, I just approve it, and that's key. So I'm gonna give you a story, right? So June, last month of this year, we were running a hero campaign for a client for the month, buy 2 get 1 free kind of situation, $50 a month that we were spending on a cold broad audience, dedicated landing page on this, so not like its usual landing page. And it plateaued. It blended return on ad spend to 2.2x ROAS, right? Cost per acquisition, it was $78. Frequency of the ad was up at like 6.77. So people were seeing this ad almost 7 times at this time. The reach stuck at about 13,000. 6 days left about before the month closed. So my agent, the Claude's advice was, write it out. Don't refresh, no budget change, coast to the 30th of the month. And, it's not going to get much worse, and you'll be fine. And like, it's still, overall, it's going to be fine. So I pushed back. I asked, and by the way, this is like the whole episode right here. I asked, why wouldn't we add a new creative or bump the spend, or both? Right. And so if you're a buyer and you're listening to this and you've been doing this for years, like, you'd be like, of course, like, but I'm not, like that's part of the reason I'm doing this, is because like I feel like I'm having this growth technically with ad spend, and I've been doing this for less than a year, so anyone can do this. And you might even have better insights from different experiences that you have and solutions that you've come up with for your company. And so that's part of why I wanted to do this episode. So I asked him, why wouldn't we add a new creative or bump the spend or both? Because I don't know why that. I don't know if that works or not. It's just something that I thought about, because I think that's one of the things that had happened in one of the first ads, and it was probably a completely different situation, but in my mind it was a very similar situation, so that's why I asked that question. And so I do want to be clear, like, I wasn't the expert in the exchange, and I'm still don't feel like I'm a Facebook ads expert. I didn't know the answer, right? I was asking, in my mind, a naive question. I just didn't accept the answer it had been handed to me. So here's what came back. I'm going to read to you, because I can't like paraphrase it, and I want you to really feel what it said. So I'm pulling up the chat and so I can read it to you. It said, that question exposed two errors. The first was reusing a conclusion without re-deriving it. The products listing was about a from scratch concept. What was actually available on the hero product was a last call urgency overlay on the existing winner, near zero setup lift, and it doubles as the close. Not the same thing at all. The second was treating a high frequency as a saturation verdict rather than checking the disconfirming number. I'd cited 6.77 as a proof that the audience was exhausted, but the honest checks was the post landing page fix split. That split later came back at 3.82x versus 1.47x prefix. The campaign wasn't dead. The early days were dragging the blended number down. Read that again in your head. It already had a lesson stored from a different product a different products campaign, same company, just different product. So it had a different lesson stored that said, don't start a new creative with the week left. It can't earn back the setup time. I think it's a perfectly good lesson. I don't really know, but I think it is. And it reached into its memory, pulled that conclusion out, and applied it to a situation that didn't really fit, because what was actually on the table wasn't a from scratch concept. It was an urgency overlay on the creative that was already winning. Almost no setup costs, and it doubles as the close. And I'm remembering right now, I'm pretty sure that was also because it had started a new chat at this point, because the previous one had run out of space, and this is where the real benefit comes from. And so anyways, also the frequency number, it had treated 6.77 as a verdict, that the audience was exhausted and case closed, right? But the disconfirming number was sitting right there in the same sheet. We'd fixed the landing page mid-month, split the data on that date, and you get 3.82x versus 1.47x before. The campaign wasn't saturated. The early days were dragging the average down. Neither of those errors was a knowledge failure. It knew all of it. Both numbers were in its own memory. So here's what we ran. We built the last call, ends on the 30th, duplicated off the winning creative. We dropped it into the same ad set, let the original running, and we held the budget at $50 a day. The last part is deliberate, and I wanted to explain it because it's the part people get wrong. We didn't touch the budget on purpose. More spend forces expansion onto a creative that's already worn out, and it resets the learning phase anyways. A fresh creative also resets learning, but it resets frequency at the same time. Same reset, and you get something for it. So that's not a hack. It's a trade you make with your eyes open. Adding an ad to a live ad set is a significant edit. I think Meta just re-enters exploration. We wanted the exploration. Frequency was 7 and reach was stuck. We spent the reset to buy new people. So the result, the last call ad ran at 9.15x at $20 cost per acquisition. The frequency reset, and the month closed at 3.12 blended, up from the 2.2x plateau. So either way, the end of the month closed hard. And it all just worked. I mean, 3.x at the end of the month is great. I think that the next step would be to hold these campaigns for longer than a month. Doing the month longs has been very profitable for the company, but we want to make sure that we're always taking it to the next level. But that's just something that I'm also going to do with the memory, right? Like, so what happens when we do 1 month versus 2 months? And I know some of you guys were going to like text me or DM me and say, dude, this is why you should do 8 weeks or 9 weeks or whatever. And that's totally cool. I'm gonna try all those, depending on different situations and what clients I'm working with and how much ad spend we're choosing to play with, right? Because that's also important, right? But again, the return isn't the point. Here's what the point is. 2 things got written back into the operating doc that day, and they're standing rules now. 1, queue as a second creative before launch, and plan the last call refresh into every hero campaign. Those stopped being reactions and just became defaults now. And I carried those over actually to a different account as well. And then the bigger one, a decision protocol got written directly in response to this failure. 4 things it now has to do. So here are the 4 things that it now has to do. I'm just going to read them to you. Surface the levers it rejected, justify the heuristic for this case, check the disconfirming metric, and never reuse a conclusion without re-deriving it. It does that every time, and it's actually pretty cool to see it now in the chat, because then it's like it gives me those 4 things and explains it. And then if anything, it helps me think about better questions to ask it, or different situations or solutions that I can think of that maybe it didn't think of, and then I would ask it. All right. And again, sometimes it's just like, dude, that's completely wrong. And that's totally cool. I'm not here to be right. I'm here to be successful, right? And so that is a protocol an agent wrote to protect itself from its own memory. And now it's in the project instructions, and it's also in its, standing drive memory. So it has a double, triple failsafe in a sense. So let me say the uncomfortable part out loud. We spend all this energy telling people to give their AI a memory. I've told you to do it twice in the newsletter and now here, and it's right. Without memory, you circle forever and you conclude the tool is broken. But memory has its own failure mode, and nobody talks about it. Cached conclusions become dogma. The exact system I built to stop my agent from re-deriving everything is a system that handed its president from the wrong campaign and let it apply it with total confidence. Feed a thing its own history, and sometimes it will obey that history instead of thinking. And it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't sound like an error. It sounds like experience. This is not an ads problem. I run an email agent across 5 inboxes, wrote about that, and there's a podcast episode about that. 5 different companies I represent, all feeding into one system. Guess what happens? Right? A triage rules that was exactly right for one company gets quietly applied to another where it doesn't belong. Same disease, different room. Any of you running an AI with a memory, a project folder, a knowledge base, a doc it reads, you have this problem right now. You just haven't caught it because a cached conclusion is invisible until someone asks why. So what broke it open that day in June? Not my expertise. I didn't know the answer. I asked, why wouldn't we change the creative or bump the spend? A question a beginner, which I feel like I am, would ask. Like, why wouldn't we do that? I mean, please tell me that I'm wrong, but I just want to know why I'm wrong. And that's exactly why it worked. I was the only one in the conversation, which there was no one else in the room at that point, who hadn't already accepted the cached answer, right? This is the argument for why you can't automate yourself out of the loop. And it's not the flattering version. It's not that you know more than the machine. Most days you don't. 99% of the time you don't. It's that you're the one who can ask dumb questions without being embarrassed. And it's the one thing a memory-backed system can't do for itself, because everything it has is already a conclusion. There's one more piece, and it's the reason any of this functions. It doesn't get offended, and that's beautiful. I can float a half-formed idea at it at 0 social cost, and it can't tell me I'm wrong without it turning into a thing, because I also don't get offended, right? So it could tell me I'm wrong, and that's totally cool too. I don't care. Sometimes it readjusts, sometimes it holds its ground and explains why it understands why I would think that, and then explains why not, because it knows I'm the one who has to make an informed decision. So it's very clear for the AI agent that, like, I am making the final decisions, even though I always say, like, hey, I'm hiring you. I'm like, in the prompt, you should always do that, right? Like, hey, pretend that you are like the #1 Facebook ads representative in the world, and like, you know all the things that there is to know, kind of deal, and like, you should act that way. But at the end of the day, we prompted in that sort of way, but we still let it know. But I am the one that's making the final decision. So whenever I ask you, please let me know why I'm wrong, or how it's helping you think of another solution. I mean, try running that type of loop with a human contractor every 6 weeks for a year, and what's going to happen? Like, imagine telling a contractor you're wrong, or like, why aren't you doing this? And it's not going to try to. It's just going to, or he or she is just going to. It's not going to be pretty if you do that every 6 weeks for a year. And listen to how it all ended. This is the last thing I wrote in that entry, and I've thought about it more than anything else in this quarter. I'm just going to read it to you. When you're the one servicing the lever, that's a miss on my end, not a win on yours. It's holding itself to a standard that I didn't ask for. And I know that you probably have seen responses like that on AI. You're just like, whatever, you're just being whatever it's being. And maybe that's true. Maybe like, but for me, I like to think of that, but that's also why I also need to hold it accountable and not just expect it to have the right answers at all the times. And it's also why it empowers us as creators, as entrepreneurs, to grow at a much higher pace than we've ever been able to. So with the standing job, it's smaller and stranger than people think. It's keeping your AI current. It isn't maintaining a wiki. It's keeping its memory honest. Ask why, make it re-derive, check the number that would prove it wrong, and be willing to be the person in the room asking the obvious question, because everybody else in that room is a conclusion. I get asked constantly for the email agent, so I packaged it up, the actual rule book, safety guardrails is already baked in and ready to drop it into your own tool. But I understand what I'm giving you is it's not a problem, it's a maintained system. That agent handles 90% of my inbox silently, and it does not do that because I built it well. It does that because it's been corrected hundreds of times by a person who kept asking why. The rulebook is the easy part. I'm handing you the easy part. The rest is the standing job, and it's yours, right? So it's free. Link is in the show notes. I think that's the one that's the most valuable for people. And if you open up your Claude or Chat, there's always like examples of like, hey, get an email agent to work. Those work. I've tried those too. Okay, but especially if you're handling like multiple emails, use mine. It's easy. Like it's and we can build it for you as well too. But if you have 45 minutes, like you can set it up like fully functional, and it's legit. Again, like it helps with emails come in with receipts, right? And again, I have 5 different emails, so like sometimes there's a receipt for this company, this receipts for that company, this receipts for that other company, and I actually have a drive with like taxes, like 2026 taxes for each of those companies. And it used to be that like I used to get those emails, and the very first iteration of the agent was like, oh, put it in a folder for 2026 taxes. Okay, great. But now it's like it does that, but it does it also per company, and it basically takes a snapshot of the picture or of the email, and like puts it into the drive with the corresponding company with the 2026 taxes already in there, and then it goes into QuickBooks and itemizes it as well too. So it's all part of the email agent that gets like you can continue adding a step. What matters is the right foundation, and that's what you're getting for free. So I hope you got something out of this episode. I'm basically wanting to share some of my wins using AI, especially for Facebook. I remember like 3 years ago, I started playing with Facebook ads, and again, I still consider myself being novice at best with it because I still don't know a lot about it. And like sometimes, like again, see what friends are doing and do YouTube stuff, and it just helps me ask better questions in this day and age. But it used to be that I would try things and it just would never work, and I was probably like missing a piece or two, or I wasn't spending enough, or I wasn't confident enough to spend enough, or whatever the case might be. I work with supplements, and so like that becomes a thing. And so those are all learning steps, which if anyone's going to get really good at any part of any job, there's going to be learning steps that I feel that like using AI, not just for like the thing, but to check itself on the thing, and then create a memory about checking itself on the thing so it can help you do the thing better. And that's what this was all about. And yeah, shoot me a DM, an email, whatever you prefer. I hope that you keep winning, and see you on the next episode.